The wind howled like a wounded beast through the unforgiving plains of Wyoming Territory as Beatrice Valentine stared at the horizon, her heart as empty as the wooden crib beside her bed. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life had withered away with the last winter frost. Beatrice hadn't always lived in this desolate stretch of wilderness. 2 years prior, she'd been a schoolteacher in Boston with soft hands and dreams of adventure. That's when she'd answered an advertisement in the newspaper. Teacher needed for growing settlement in Wyoming Territory. Room and board provided. The promise of open skies and independence had called to her like a siren's song. The small town of Juniper Creek had welcomed her with open arms. The townspeople had been kind, if a bit rough around the edges. But nobody had warned her about the harsh winters, the unrelenting summers, or the profound loneliness that would settle into her bones like the morning dew on prairie grass. Beatrice ran her fingers along the smooth wooden edge of the crib she'd commissioned from the town carpenter 6 months ago. Back when hope had bloomed inside her like a desert flower after a rare rainfall, back before she'd lost the baby she'd carried for nearly 7 months. "You're a fool," she whispered to herself, her voice catching on the last word. "A damn fool." The midwife had told her it happened sometimes. No reason, no explanation, just nature's cruel hand. The baby, a little girl, had simply stopped moving one day. Beatrice had known something was wrong even before the cramping began, before the blood soaked through her mattress in the middle of the night. She'd named her Emma, though no one in town knew that. She'd buried her in a small pine box on the hill behind the schoolhouse, beneath the only tree for miles. No marker, no ceremony, just Beatrice and her grief. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. She quickly wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron and took a deep breath. "Coming," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. When she opened the door, the last person she expected to see was Virgil Vance, the mysterious cowboy who'd arrived in Juniper Creek 3 months prior. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the setting sun behind him. His face was weathered by years in the saddle, his eyes a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Miss Valentine," he said, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Beatrice straightened her spine. "Not at all, Mr. Vance. What can I do for you? I've come about the reading lessons." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. "Mayor Thompson mentioned you sometimes give lessons to adults who never had proper schooling." Beatrice blinked in surprise. Virgil Vance did not strike her as the type of man who would admit to any shortcoming, let alone seek help for it. "I do," she said finally. "Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the schoolhouse. I work late at the Hendersons' ranch those days." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I was hoping for private lessons. I can pay." Beatrice hesitated. The idea of being alone with this man made her strangely nervous, though not entirely in an unpleasant way. She'd seen him around town, of course helping Mrs. Patterson unload her wagon when her husband was laid up with a broken leg, stepping between the saloon owner's son and a much smaller boy during a dispute. He was quiet, hardworking, and kept to himself, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of depths untold. "Sundays," she said finally. "After church, I have an hour before dinner at the boarding house." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you, Miss Valentine, I appreciate it." As he turned to leave, a gust of wind blew through the open door, rustling papers on her table and causing the empty crib to rock slightly. Virgil's gaze followed the movement, and for a brief moment, something like understanding flickered in his eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," Beatrice said firmly, closing the door before he could comment on what he'd seen. The next morning, Beatrice walked the quarter-mile to the schoolhouse as the sun crested the eastern hills. The one-room building was modest but sturdy, with windows on all sides to catch the breeze during the warmer months. Inside, rows of rough-hewn desks faced her own larger desk at the front of the room. A blackboard hung on the wall behind it, and bookshelves lined the back wall. She arrived early, as always, to start the fire in the small iron stove. The October mornings had grown chilly, and her 16 students ranging in age from 6 to 15 would need the warmth. As she arranged her lesson plans for the day, the door creaked open. Beatrice turned, expecting to see one of her early arriving pupils, but instead found Virgil Vance standing awkwardly in the doorway, holding what appeared to be a small package. "Mr. Vance," she said, surprised. Our lesson isn't until Sunday, I know. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I brought something for you, or rather for the school. He approached her desk and placed the package on its surface. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with simple twine. What is it? Beatrice asked, untying the string. Books. Found them in a trunk. I bought at an auction in Cheyenne last spring. Figured they'd be more use here than gathering dust in my cabin. Beatrice unwrapped the package to reveal 3 well-worn but cared-for volumes. Robinson Crusoe, The Last of the Mohicans, and a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. These are wonderful, she said, genuinely touched. Books were precious commodities out here, where the nearest proper bookstore was a 2-day ride away. The older children will especially appreciate these. Virgil nodded, seeming pleased. I should let you prepare for your day. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Miss Valentine. Yes, Mr. Vance. I'm looking forward to Sunday. After he left, Beatrice sat down heavily in her chair, her fingers absently tracing the embossed title on the book of sonnets. There was something about Virgil Vance that unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in a manner that made her feel as though the ground beneath her feet wasn't quite solid. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm. Beatrice taught her students, took her meals at the boarding house, and spent her evenings grading assignments or reading by lantern light. But as Sunday approached, she found herself growing increasingly anxious about her upcoming lesson with Virgil. After church service on Sunday, Beatrice remained in the schoolhouse while the rest of the congregation dispersed to their homes for the day's main meal. She had arranged her teaching materials on her desk and was reviewing some basic reading exercises when Virgil arrived, precisely at the appointed time. Miss Valentine, he greeted her, hat in hand. Mr. Vance, please have a seat. She gestured to the desk closest to hers. Virgil folded his tall frame into the small desk, looking comically out of place. Beatrice bit back a smile. Perhaps we should sit at the reading table, she suggested, nodding toward the round table at the back of the room where her youngest pupils gathered for reading circles. Once they were more comfortably settled, Beatrice asked, What level of reading are you comfortable with, Mr. Vance? A flush crept up his neck. I know my letters, can read simple words, not much beyond that. Beatrice nodded, keeping her expression neutral. That's a fine place to start. May I ask how you've managed all these years? Got by on my memory and observation mostly. In my line of work, you don't need much book learning, but I've come to realize there's a whole world I'm missing. She pulled out a primer designed for older beginners. Let's start here and see how it goes. For the next hour, Beatrice guided Virgil through basic reading exercises. He was a quick study, clearly intelligent despite his lack of formal education. His determination was evident in the furrow of his brow as he sounded out words, in the set of his jaw when he struggled with a particular passage. You're doing remarkably well, Beatrice said as their time came to an end. You have a natural aptitude. Virgil looked up, a rare smile transforming his usually serious face. I have a good teacher. The simple compliment warmed her in a way she hadn't expected. As they gathered their things, Virgil asked, Same time next week? Yes, that would be fine. As they stepped outside, Beatrice was surprised to see that the weather had turned. Dark clouds rolled across the sky and the wind had picked up considerably. Looks like a storm's coming, Virgil observed. May I walk you home? Beatrice hesitated only briefly before nodding. They walked in companionable silence until they reached her small cabin at the edge of town. Thank you for the lesson, Miss Valentine, Virgil said as they stopped at her door. You're welcome, Mr. Vance. You're a dedicated student. He smiled again, that rare transformation that made him look years younger. Until next Sunday, then. Beatrice watched him walk away, his tall figure growing smaller against the darkening sky. Only when the first fat raindrops began to fall did she turn and enter her cabin. The empty crib stood where it always did, beside her bed. But for the first time in months, Beatrice didn't immediately feel the sharp stab of grief at the sight of it. Instead, she found herself thinking of Virgil's determined face as he worked through his reading lesson, and wondering what other hidden depths might lie beneath his quiet exterior. Over the next few weeks, their Sunday lessons became the highlight of Beatrice's otherwise monotonous routine. Virgil progressed quickly, his natural intelligence making up for years of missed education. By mid-November, he was reading simple stories with only occasional assistance. "You're making remarkable progress," Beatrice told him one Sunday as they finished a chapter from Robinson Crusoe. "I have something to prove, I suppose," Virgil said, closing the book carefully. To whom he looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. "To myself, and maybe to you." The frankness of his statement caught Beatrice off guard. Before she could formulate a response, the schoolhouse door banged open and Mayor Thompson burst in, his round face flushed with exertion. "Miss Valentine, thank goodness you're here. There's been an accident at the mill. Little Jimmy Ross got his arm caught in one of the machines." Beatrice was on her feet immediately. As the closest thing Juniper Creek had to a medical professional, she'd had some training as a nurse during the war. She was often called upon in emergencies. "How bad is it?" she asked, already gathering her medical bag from the cupboard where she kept it. "Bad enough. Doc Wilson's over in Clearwater delivering the Peterson twins. You're all we've got." "I'll come with you," Virgil said, standing. "You might need help." Beatrice nodded gratefully, and the three of them hurried through town toward the sawmill at its eastern edge. A small crowd had gathered outside, their faces grim in the fading afternoon light. Inside, 10-year-old Jimmy lay on a makeshift pallet, his face white with shock and pain. His father knelt beside him, whispering reassurances. Jimmy's right arm was a bloody mess below the elbow, the bone clearly visible through torn flesh. Beatrice pushed aside her initial horror and knelt beside the boy. "Hello, Jimmy. I'm going to help you all right," the boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I need clean water, bandages, and my bottle of laudanum," she instructed, opening her medical bag. "And someone needs to hold him still." Virgil stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll do it." As Beatrice cleaned and assessed the wound, she was acutely aware of Virgil's steady presence beside her. He spoke quietly to Jimmy, telling him stories about the horses he'd broken, the cattle drives he'd led, the stars he'd slept under. His deep, calm voice seemed to soothe the boy almost as much as the laudanum Beatrice had administered. The arm wasn't as bad as it had first appeared. Though the wound was deep and would leave a significant scar, the bone wasn't broken, and all the tendons seemed intact. "He'll keep the arm," she told Mr. Ross when she'd finished bandaging the wound. "But he needs to see Doc Wilson as soon as he returns, and the bandages must be changed twice daily to prevent infection." Mr. Ross nodded, gratitude and relief evident in his weathered face. "Thank you, Miss Valentine, and you too, Vance." It was dark by the time Beatrice and Virgil left the mill. The temperature had dropped sharply, and Beatrice shivered in her light shawl. Without a word, Virgil removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of leather, pine, and something indefinably male. "Thank you," she said, pulling it more tightly around herself. "You were amazing in there," Virgil said as they walked back toward town. "How did you learn to do all that?" "During the war," Beatrice replied. "I volunteered as a nurse in a field hospital outside of Richmond, saw things no one should ever have to see." Virgil was quiet for a moment. "I fought too, under General Sherman, marched all the way to the sea." Beatrice glanced at him, surprised. They'd never discussed their pasts before. "How old were you?" 17 when I enlisted, 20 when it ended, so young we all were, too young to understand what we were really fighting for." He paused. "Is that why you came out west, to leave those memories behind?" Beatrice considered the question. "Partly. I also wanted adventure, independence, to build something of my own." They had reached her cabin. Beatrice removed his coat and handed it back to him. "Thank you for your help today, Mr. Vance." "Virgil," he said. "I think after today you might call me Virgil." Beatrice smiled. "Then you must call me Beatrice." "Beatrice," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Virgil." Inside her cabin, Beatrice moved about her evening routine with a strange lightness in her step. As she prepared for bed, her gaze fell on the empty crib, and for the first time she allowed herself to truly consider why she hadn't put it away after all these months. The following Sunday, Virgil arrived for his lesson with a small bundle tucked under his arm. "What's this?" Beatrice asked as he placed it on the table between them. "A thank you for your help with Jimmy." He gestured for her to open it. Inside the brown paper was a beautifully carved wooden box, its lid decorated with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. "Virgil, it's beautiful," Beatrice breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Made it myself. Figured you could use it for your teaching supplies or whatever you like. You carved this." She looked up at him in surprise, a flush crept up his neck. "Used to carve a lot as a boy. My pa taught me before he passed. Haven't done much of it in years, but I still remember how. It's exquisite craftsmanship. Thank you." Their lesson that day was different. The usual formality between them had softened, replaced by a comfortable familiarity. Virgil read with growing confidence, and Beatrice found herself enjoying the deep timbre of his voice as he worked through a passage about a ship lost at sea. As their hour drew to a close, Virgil closed the book and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Beatrice," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you properly. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Call on me?" "Yes, perhaps for dinner next Saturday. I'm not much of a cook, but the hotel serves a decent meal." The invitation hung between them, changing everything. Beatrice knew that accepting would signal to the entire town that she was receptive to Virgil's attentions. In a community as small as Juniper Creek, such things did not go unnoticed. But as she looked at him, this quiet, thoughtful man who had slowly revealed himself to her over their weeks together, she found she didn't mind the prospect of the town's speculation. "I would like that," she said finally. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. The news of their dinner plans spread through Juniper Creek like wildfire. By Monday afternoon, 3 different women had found reasons to visit Beatrice's classroom after school, their curiosity barely concealed behind polite inquiries about various community matters. "Virgil Vance is a fine man," Mrs. Patterson said as she supposedly dropped by to discuss her son's progress. "Quiet but reliable. And those eyes. Half the unmarried women in town have set their caps for him since he arrived." Beatrice merely smiled and steered the conversation back to young Timothy Patterson's improving penmanship. Saturday evening arrived clear and cold. Beatrice dressed with more care than usual, selecting a blue dress she rarely wore because it was impractical for teaching. It matched her eyes, her mother had always said. She pinned her hair up but left a few curls framing her face and dabbed a touch of rose water behind her ears. As she was fastening a simple silver locket around her neck, a gift from her father before she left Boston, a knock sounded at her door. Taking a deep breath, she went to answer it. Virgil stood on her porch, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes, his hat in his hands. For a moment they simply looked at each other. "You look beautiful," he said finally. "Thank you, you clean up quite well yourself." He offered his arm and she took it, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath her fingertips as they walked toward the hotel at the center of town. The dining room of the Juniper Creek Hotel was the closest thing the town had to a fine restaurant. White tablecloths covered the tables, and oil lamps cast a warm glow over the room. Several other diners glanced their way as they entered, barely disguising their interest. Virgil had reserved a table by the window, slightly removed from the others. A small vase with a single wildflower sat in the center. "I hope this is all right," he said as he held her chair. "It's lovely," Beatrice assured him. Over dinner, surprisingly good roast beef with potatoes and fresh bread, they talked more freely than they ever had during their lessons. Virgil told her about growing up in Tennessee, about his father who had been a skilled carpenter, about joining the Union Army despite his Southern roots because he couldn't abide the idea of fighting to preserve slavery. "My family disowned me for it," he said, cutting a piece of beef. "Haven't spoken to any of them since I enlisted." "That must have been difficult," Beatrice said softly. He shrugged. "Made my choice, had to live with it." He looked up at her. "What about your family? Do they know you're out here teaching the children of cowboys and miners?" Beatrice smiled wryly. "My father passed away 2 years ago. My mother remarried quickly, a business associate of my father's. They moved to New York. We exchanged letters at Christmas." "So we're both alone in the world," Virgil observed. "I suppose we are." Beatrice paused. "Though I've found Juniper Creek to be welcoming for the most part." "For the most part," she hesitated, then decided on honesty. People are kind, but there's always a certain distance. I'm still the teacher from back east after 2 years. Virgil nodded, understanding. Took me nearly a year at my last place before people stopped calling me the new hand. Some places, you're always going to be an outsider. Is that why you move around so much? Beatrice asked, remembering bits of conversation where he'd mentioned various locations across the West. Partly, he admitted, and partly because I've been looking for something. What? His blue eyes met hers directly. Home, a place that feels right, people who matter. Something in his gaze made Beatrice's heart beat faster. She looked down at her plate, suddenly flustered. And have you found it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm beginning to think I might have. After dinner, they walked slowly back toward Beatrice's cabin, the night sky above them a tapestry of stars. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, their breath forming small clouds in front of them. I've always loved the stars out here, Beatrice said, tilting her head back to look at the vast expanse above them. In Boston, you could only see a handful through the smoke and haze. My father taught me the constellations, Virgil said, following her gaze upward. Said they were God's map written across the heavens. Show me, Beatrice said impulsively. Virgil stepped closer, pointing upward. See those 3 bright stars in a row? That's Orion's belt. And up there, that bright one is the North Star Polaris. Sailors and travelers have used it to find their way for centuries. As he spoke, Beatrice was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cold night air. When he lowered his arm, their eyes met, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to narrow to just the two of them under the vast Wyoming sky. Beatrice, he said softly, her name a question and a request all at once. She nodded almost imperceptibly, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. His hands came up to frame her face, his fingers warm against her cold cheeks. When they finally broke apart, Beatrice was breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. I should get you home, Virgil said, his voice rough. It's getting colder. They walked the rest of the way in a charged silence, their hands occasionally brushing. At her door, he kissed her once more, briefly but with promise. Good night, Beatrice. Good night, Virgil. Inside, Beatrice leaned against the closed door, her fingers touching her lips in wonder. It had been so long since she'd felt this way, this breathless anticipation, this sense of possibility. Her gaze fell on the empty crib, and for a moment, the familiar grief threatened to overwhelm the joy of the evening. But then she remembered Virgil's quiet strength, his patient determination, and found herself wondering if perhaps there might still be room in her life for hope after all. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of stolen moments and increasing intimacy between Beatrice and Virgil. Their Sunday lessons continued, though they now spent as much time talking as they did studying. Virgil began calling on her regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, a piece of ribbon he'd picked up in town, a smooth stone with unusual markings, once even a jar of honey from a beekeeper passing through. The town watched their courtship with interest, and for the most part approval. Beatrice found that her status had subtly shifted. She was no longer just the teacher from back east, but Virgil Vance's girl. A designation that somehow made her more a part of the community than 2 years of dedicated teaching had managed to accomplish. 2 days before Christmas, a severe blizzard hit Juniper Creek. The snow fell so thick and fast that Beatrice could barely see the fence surrounding her small vegetable garden from her window. The temperature plummeted, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. Beatrice stoked her fire higher and wrapped herself in the quilt her grandmother had made. She was grateful for the provisions she'd laid in enough flour, sugar, coffee, and dried meat to last through several days of being snowbound if necessary. As darkness fell, the storm intensified. Beatrice was just preparing to turn in for the night when a pounding at her door startled her. She grabbed her shawl and hurried to answer it. Virgil stood on her porch, covered in snow, his face grim in the lantern light. Virgil. What on earth, the Ross boy, he said, his voice tight with urgency. His arms take an infection. They sent word to the ranch for me to fetch you. Doc Wilson's still not back from Clearwater. Road's impassable now. Beatrice didn't hesitate. Let me get my medical bag and some extra bandages. It's bad out there, Virgil warned as she gathered her supplies. Worst storm I've seen in years. All the more reason to hurry. She bundled up in her heaviest coat, wrapped a woolen scarf around her head, and pulled on thick mittens. Virgil had brought a horse, a sturdy bay gelding with a reputation for surefootedness in difficult conditions. "You'll ride," he said, helping her up. "I'll lead him." "We can both ride," Beatrice protested. Virgil shook his head. "Too risky in this weather. I need to feel the path." The journey to the Ross homestead, normally a 15-minute walk, took nearly an hour through the blinding snow. Virgil forged ahead, one hand on the horse's bridle, the other holding a lantern that was barely visible through the swirling white. Several times they had to stop while Virgil got his bearings. The landscape transformed into an unrecognizable white wasteland. By the time they reached the Ross cabin, Beatrice was chilled to the bone despite her layers. Inside, the scene was grim. Jimmy lay on his bed, his face flushed with fever, his injured arm swollen and angry red. His mother sat beside him, applying cold compresses to his forehead. "Thank God you're here," Mrs. Ross said, her face lined with worry. "His fever started rising this morning, and by afternoon, I could see the red streaks moving up his arm." Beatrice removed her outer garments and washed her hands in the basin Mrs. Ross provided. Then she carefully unwrapped the bandage on Jimmy's arm. The wound beneath was inflamed, with yellow pus seeping from its edges. Angry red streaks extended several inches up his arm, blood poisoning. "We need to drain it," she told Mrs. Ross, keeping her voice steady despite her concern, "and clean it thoroughly, then I'll need to make a poultice." "Will he be all right?" Mrs. Ross asked, her voice trembling. Beatrice met her gaze honestly. "I'll do everything I can." For the next hour, Beatrice worked methodically, first lancing the infected areas to allow the pus to drain, then cleaning the wound thoroughly with carbolic acid solution from her medical bag. Jimmy whimpered and cried out despite the laudanum she'd administered, and Virgil held him steady, murmuring reassurances. When the wound was clean, Beatrice applied a poultice made from herbs she carried in her medical bag, echinacea and yarrow primarily, mixed with a bit of honey for its antiseptic properties. "This needs to stay on for at least 4 hours, then be replaced with a fresh one," she instructed Mrs. Ross. "And he needs to drink as much water as you can get into him." "What about the fever?" Mr. Ross asked from where he stood by the fireplace. "Willow bark tea will help," Beatrice said, measuring out some dried bark from her supplies. "Steep this for 10 minutes, then have him drink it as hot as he can stand." As Beatrice worked, the storm outside intensified. The wind rattled the windows, and the temperature in the cabin dropped despite the roaring fire. "You can't go back out in that," Mr. Ross said as Beatrice finally packed up her supplies. "You'll both freeze to death before you make it halfway." Virgil moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. "He's right, it's gotten worse." "You're welcome to stay here," Mrs. Ross offered. "It'll be tight, but we can make room." Beatrice hesitated, torn between propriety and practicality, but one look at the blizzard raging outside settled the matter. "Thank you. I should stay close to monitor Jimmy anyway." The night that followed was one of the longest of Beatrice's life. The Rosses had only one spare pallet, which they insisted Virgil take, while Beatrice dozed in a chair pulled up beside Jimmy's bed. Every hour she checked his fever and changed the compresses on his forehead. By dawn, his fever had broken and the angry red streaks had begun to recede. "He's going to be all right," she told Mrs. Ross as the first gray light filtered through the windows. "The infection is responding to the treatment." Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine white. Drifts as high as a man's waist hugged the sides of the cabin, and the path they had followed the night before had completely disappeared. "Going to take some digging to get out," Mr. Ross observed, looking out the window. "I'll help," Virgil offered. For the next 2 hours, the men worked to clear a path from the cabin to the barn. Beatrice helped Mrs. Ross prepare a hearty breakfast of flapjacks and salt pork, which they all ate around the kitchen table, relief at Jimmy's improvement making the simple meal seem like a feast. By mid-morning, it was time to leave. Jimmy was sleeping peacefully, his fever gone, the swelling in his arm noticeably reduced. "I can't thank you enough," Mrs. Ross said, embracing Beatrice at the door. "If you hadn't come." "You would have managed," Beatrice assured her, though they both knew it wasn't true. Blood poisoning could kill quickly, especially in a child. The journey back to town was slow but less harrowing than the night before. The sun shone brilliantly on the new fallen snow, creating a dazzling landscape of white broken only by the occasional pine tree or fence post. "You were amazing last night," Virgil said as they trudged through the deep snow, the horse following behind them. "The way you handled everything, knew exactly what to do." Beatrice shrugged, though his praise warmed her. "I've had practice, unfortunately. Infections were common in the field hospitals. Still, not many women would have ventured out in a blizzard like that." "Not many men would have come to fetch me," she countered. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of their boots in the snow and the occasional snort from the horse. "I've been thinking," Virgil said finally, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "About what happens when the winter's over." Beatrice glanced at him, something in his tone making her pulse quicken. "Oh, I've been offered a permanent position at the Henderson Ranch, foreman, good pay, a cabin of my own." "That's wonderful," Beatrice said, genuinely happy for him. The position was a prestigious one, a sign of how much Mr. Henderson valued Virgil's work. "I'd be settling here. Permanently." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "Beatrice, I know we haven't known each other long, but I hope that you feel what I do. That this is something real between us." Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. "I do. Then I was wondering if you might consider." He took a deep breath. "If you might consider becoming my wife come spring." The words hung in the clear winter air between them. Beatrice stared at him, momentarily speechless. She had suspected his feelings were deepening, as were hers, but hadn't expected a proposal so soon. "Virgil, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden, just think about it." Beatrice nodded, her mind whirling. "I will." They resumed walking, the silence between them charged with unspoken thoughts. As they approached her cabin, Beatrice made a decision. "Would you come in for coffee?" she asked. "To warm up before you head back to the ranch." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I'd like that." Inside, Beatrice built up the fire while Virgil stomped the snow from his boots. She put the coffee pot on the stove and hung their wet outer garments near the fire to dry. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on either of them. This is what it could be like, Beatrice thought as she measured coffee into the pot. A shared life, simple moments together. Once the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and brought them to the small table. Virgil accepted his with a grateful nod, wrapping his large hands around the mug for warmth. "Virgil," Beatrice said, gathering her courage. "Before I can give you an answer, there's something you need to know, something I haven't told anyone in town." He looked at her expectantly, his expression open. "The crib," she said, gesturing toward the wooden cradle that still stood beside her bed. "I was with child when I commissioned it," understanding dawned in his eyes. "The baby. A little girl, stillborn at 7 months. I buried her behind the schoolhouse under the oak tree." The words came easier than she had expected, the burden of her secret lightening as she shared it. "Her name was Emma." Virgil reached across the table and took her hand in his. "I'm so sorry, Beatrice." "I never knew her father's name," Beatrice continued, needing him to understand everything. "He was a soldier I treated during the war. We were together only one night before he was sent to the front. He died at Petersburg." She waited, watching his face for judgment or disgust to appear. Instead, his grip on her hand merely tightened. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said simply. Beatrice felt tears well in her eyes. "I've kept the crib because I couldn't bear to put it away, as if that would mean admitting she was really gone." Virgil stood and came around the table, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. Beatrice buried her face against his chest, letting the tears come at last, tears for Emma, for the lost soldier, for the loneliness she had carried for so long. "I see you looking at it sometimes," Virgil said softly against her hair, "with such sadness in your eyes." Beatrice pulled back slightly to look up at him. "You noticed?" "I notice everything about you, Beatrice." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "The way you tap your fingers when you're thinking. How you always save the crusts of your bread for the birds. The small smile you get when one of your students finally understands something difficult." His observation touched her deeply. To be seen so completely, to be known it was a gift she hadn't realized how badly she needed. "About your proposal," she said, her voice steadier now. "I don't need time to think about it. My answer is yes." Joy broke across his face like sunrise. Yes. Yes, she repeated, more certain with each passing moment. I will marry you, Virgil Vance. His kiss was tender at first, then deepening with a hunger that matched her own awakening desire. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Spring seems very far away, Virgil murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Beatrice laughed softly. We have plenty to do before then. A wedding to plan, for one thing. And a home to prepare, Virgil added. The foreman's cabin needs some work to make it suitable for a lady like yourself. I'm hardly a delicate flower, Beatrice reminded him. I've survived 2 Wyoming winters on my own. Even so, I want to make it nice for you. He glanced around her small cabin, his gaze lingering on the crib. Will you want to bring that to our new home? The question caught her off guard. She followed his gaze to the empty cradle that had been both comfort and torment these past months. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me thinks it's time to let it go, but another part, you still built a room for hope, Virgil said softly. That's what that crib represents. Not just grief, but the possibility of joy. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes again at his understanding. Yes, that's exactly it. Then bring it, he said simply. And perhaps someday, God willing, it won't stand empty. The promise in his words filled her heart to overflowing. Christmas Day dawned clear and bright, the recent snowfall transforming Juniper Creek into a picture-perfect winter scene. Beatrice and Virgil attended the church service together, their recent engagement the talk of the town. Afterward, they joined the communal Christmas dinner in the town hall, where everyone contributed what they could to the feast. As they sat side by side at the long table, surrounded by the townsfolk who had become Beatrice's community, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before the war. Virgil's hand found hers beneath the table, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Happy? He asked quietly, as Mayor Thompson launched into a long-winded Christmas toast at the head of the table. Beatrice squeezed his hand in response. Very. The winter months passed in a flurry of preparations. Beatrice continued teaching, while Virgil worked at the Henderson Ranch and spent his free days fixing up the foreman's cabin. The small 2-room structure was sturdy but basic, having been occupied only by single men previously. Virgil added a proper kitchen with built-in cupboards, laid new floorboards where the old ones had warped, and constructed a covered porch across the front. Beatrice visited whenever she could, bringing curtains she had sewn and other small touches to make the cabin feel like home. Their wedding was set for the first Saturday in April, when the worst of winter would be past, but before the spring cattle drive would take Virgil away for several weeks. The whole town seemed involved in the preparations. Mrs. Patterson was making the wedding cake, the Ladies' Aid Society was decorating the church, and Mr. Thompson offered the use of the hotel dining room for the reception. As the day approached, Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn to the small grave behind the schoolhouse. One crisp March afternoon, she stood beside the unmarked spot, her arms wrapped around herself against the lingering chill. I'm getting married, Emma, she said softly, to a good man who knows about you and honors your memory. The wind rustled through the oak tree above her, sending a shower of newly budded leaves down around her. I'll always carry you in my heart, Beatrice continued, but I think it's time for me to look forward now to the life I'm building with Virgil. She placed a small bunch of early crocuses on the grave, their purple blooms bright against the brown earth. As she turned to leave, she saw Virgil standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand. I thought I might find you here, he said as she approached. Wanted to give you some privacy. Thank you, she slipped her hand into his. I needed to say goodbye in a way not to her memory but to the grief that's consumed me for so long. Virgil nodded, understanding. It's not dishonoring her to be happy again. I know that now. Beatrice looked up at him, her heart full. You helped me see that. He bent and kissed her gently. Ready to go home, the word had never sounded so sweet. Yes. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, the harsh Wyoming winter finally giving way to spring. Beatrice dressed in her small cabin for the last time, helped by Mrs. Patterson and several other women from town. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory silk with a modest train and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It had been ordered from a catalog in Denver and had arrived just the week before, fitting perfectly with only minor alterations. "You look absolutely beautiful," Mrs. Patterson declared, securing the small wreath of spring flowers in Beatrice's upswept hair. "Virgil Vance is a fortunate man indeed," Beatrice smiled at her reflection in the small mirror. "I'm the fortunate one." The church was filled to capacity when Beatrice arrived. In the absence of family, Mayor Thompson had offered to give her away, an honor he took very seriously, judging by his meticulously brushed suit and solemn expression. As the small church organ began to play and Beatrice started down the aisle on the mayor's arm, her eyes found Virgil waiting for her at the altar. His face, normally so controlled, was transformed by a look of such wonder and joy that tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple gold bands and the traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up from the assembled townsfolk that made both Beatrice and Virgil laugh with surprise and pleasure. The reception that followed was the liveliest event Juniper Creek had seen in years. Tables groaned with food contributed by every household. Mr. Jenkins from the saloon donated several cases of his best whiskey, and someone produced a fiddle, leading to an impromptu dance that lasted well into the evening. As the celebration wound down, Beatrice and Virgil slipped away, mounting the horses that would take them to their new home at the Henderson Ranch. "Mrs. Vance," Virgil said as he helped her onto her mount, testing the sound of her new name. Beatrice smiled down at him. "I like the sound of that." The ride to the ranch was peaceful, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and pink. When they arrived at their cabin, Virgil insisted on carrying her across the threshold, a gesture that made Beatrice laugh with delight. Inside, everything was ready for them: a fire laid in the hearth, fresh linens on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. And in the corner of the bedroom stood Emma's crib, polished to a warm glow in the lamplight. "Do you mind that I brought it over yesterday?" Virgil asked, watching her face carefully. Beatrice crossed to the crib and ran her hand along its smooth wooden rail. "No, it belongs here." She turned to face him, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "With us, with our family." Virgil crossed to her and took her in his arms. "Our family," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "I like the sound of that." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation to Beatrice. Virgil's tenderness, his patience, his obvious desire for her all combined to awaken in her a passion she had never experienced before, even in her brief encounter during the war. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the curtains she had made, Beatrice felt a peace that had eluded her for years. "What are you thinking?" Virgil asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never expected to be this happy again," Beatrice admitted. "After Emma, I thought that part of my life was over." Virgil tightened his arms around her. "Life has a way of surprising us, indeed it does." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "When I first came west, I was running away from pain, from memories. I never imagined I'd find love here. And I never imagined I'd find a home," Virgil said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not just a place, but a person to come home to." The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery as they settled into married life. Virgil's duties as foreman kept him busy from dawn till dusk most days, while Beatrice continued teaching at the schoolhouse. Their evenings were precious time together, cooking simple meals, reading aloud to each other, and sharing the small events of their days. May brought the spring cattle drive, and Virgil was gone for 3 weeks, leading a group of cowboys taking Henderson's herd to the railhead in Cheyenne. Beatrice found the separation difficult, but filled her days with teaching and her evenings with preparations for their home, canning early vegetables from their garden, sewing curtains for the kitchen windows, writing long letters to Virgil that she gave to the weekly mail rider. When he returned, sunburned and tired but happy to be home, their reunion was sweet and passionate. As they lay together afterward, Beatrice gathered her courage to share the news she had confirmed with Doc Wilson just days before. "Virgil," she said, her voice soft in the darkness. "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, instantly alert to the significance in her tone. "What is it?" "I'm with child. Due in December, Doc Wilson thinks." For a moment, Virgil was utterly still. Then his face broke into a smile of such radiant joy that Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." "Yes." Beatrice took his hand and placed it on her still flat abdomen. "Right here." Virgil's expression grew serious. "Are you afraid?" Before Beatrice considered the question honestly. "Yes," she admitted. "Part of me is terrified, but I also have hope and faith, and you." He gathered her close, his cheek resting against her hair. "I'll be with you every step of the way, I promise." The summer months passed in a haze of happiness tinged with occasional anxiety. As Beatrice's body changed, her fears sometimes surfaced, especially at night. Virgil was unfailingly patient, holding her through her tears, reassuring her when doubts crept in. By September, her condition was obvious to everyone. Her students were fascinated by her growing belly, the younger ones asking increasingly direct questions that made Beatrice blush and the older children giggle. Doc Wilson insisted she was healthy and the pregnancy progressing normally. But as she entered her 7th month, the same point at which she had lost Emma, Beatrice found her anxiety mounting. "I can't lose this baby too," she confessed to Virgil one night, her hands protectively cradling her swollen abdomen. "I don't think I could bear it." "You won't," Virgil said with more confidence than he probably felt. "This child is strong, I can feel it." He had taken to talking to her belly each night, telling the baby stories about his day, about the horses he was training, about the land they would explore together someday. The sound of his deep voice seemed to soothe not only the active child within her, but Beatrice's own fears as well. As her due date approached, Virgil arranged to have Mrs. Patterson stay with them. The older woman had delivered numerous babies over the years when the doctor wasn't available, and her calm, capable presence was a comfort to Beatrice. "Everything looks just as it should, Mrs. Patterson assured her after examining her one December afternoon. "This baby is positioned perfectly." Still, as the 7th month mark came and went, Beatrice found herself holding her breath, counting each day as a victory. She had stopped teaching by then, finding the walk to town too taxing. Virgil had arranged his work so that he could be near the cabin, and Mr. Henderson, himself a father of 5, was understanding about the situation. "A man needs to be with his wife at such a time," he had told Virgil. "The cattle can wait." December brought bitter cold and heavy snow. Beatrice's due date, Christmas Day, according to Doc Wilson's calculations, approached with agonizing slowness. Each night, she fell asleep with Virgil's hand resting protectively on her belly, feeling their child move beneath his palm. 4 days before Christmas, Beatrice woke in the pre-dawn hours to a cramping sensation low in her abdomen. She lay still, counting the minutes between the pains, remembering Doc Wilson's instructions. "Virgil," she said, touching his shoulder when she was certain. "It's time." He was instantly awake, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Are you sure? I'll fetch Mrs. Patterson." "Yes, but there's no rush yet. The pains are still far apart." Virgil insisted on going for Mrs. Patterson anyway, unwilling to risk her not being there when needed. He returned with the older woman within the hour, by which time Beatrice's pains had increased in frequency and intensity. What followed was 18 hours of the hardest physical work Beatrice had ever done. The labor was long and difficult, the pain at times so intense she thought she might break apart from it. Virgil remained by her side throughout, wiping her brow, holding her hands, murmuring encouragement. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as she struggled through a particularly brutal contraction. "You can do this, Beatrice. I know you can." As the labor progressed, Doc Wilson arrived, having been fetched by one of Henderson's ranch hands. His presence was reassuring, his calm voice guiding her through each stage. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon on December 22nd, Beatrice gave a final, exhausted push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the small cabin. "A boy," Doc Wilson announced, placing the squalling infant on Beatrice's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Beatrice stared down at the red-faced, perfect child in wonder. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair like his father's, alive, breathing, here. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered, using the name they had chosen if the baby was a boy. "I've been waiting for you." Virgil's face was wet with tears as he leaned down to touch his son's tiny hand. "He's perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just perfect." The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and joy. Samuel, they called him Sam, proved to be a voracious eater and a generally contented baby, sleeping for blessed 3-hour stretches between feedings. Virgil was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Sam when he was fussy, watching in fascination as Beatrice nursed him. "I never knew I could love someone so much," he confessed one evening as they sat before the fire, Sam sleeping peacefully in his arms. "It's terrifying, actually." Beatrice understood completely. Her love for her son was so fierce it sometimes took her breath away. And mingled with that love was gratitude for Sam's safe arrival, for Virgil's unwavering support, for the second chance at motherhood she had never thought to have. Christmas Day that year was quiet but profound. They exchanged simple gifts. Beatrice had knitted Virgil a new scarf, and he had carved her a beautiful wooden box similar to the one he'd given her when they first began courting. But their real gift lay sleeping in the cradle that had once stood empty, the cradle that had been a symbol of grief and loss, but was now filled with new life and hope. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the Vance household expanded again. In the spring of 1879, Beatrice discovered she was expecting their second child. The news was greeted with joy, though a shadow of fear lingered from her previous experiences. "Every pregnancy is different," Doc Wilson assured her, "and you came through Sam's birth with flying colors." This pregnancy proved easier than her first, perhaps because she was less anxious, or perhaps because chasing after an active toddler left her less time to worry. By November, she was radiant with health, her belly round and tight beneath her winter dresses. On a snowy afternoon in early December, almost exactly a year after Sam's birth, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth after Virgil's mother. The labor was shorter this time, only 7 hours from start to finish, and less arduous. "She's beautiful," Virgil said, holding his daughter for the first time, his large hands cradling her tiny form with infinite gentleness. "She looks like you." Beatrice smiled tiredly up at him. "Poor child." "Lucky child," he corrected, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "To have your spirit and your heart." As their family grew, so did their home. Virgil added a second bedroom to the cabin and expanded the kitchen to accommodate their growing family. Henderson, recognizing Virgil's value to the ranch, increased his salary and offered him a small parcel of land adjacent to the ranch where they could eventually build a more substantial home. Life wasn't always easy. The Wyoming winters remained harsh, and the work of ranching and motherhood was physically demanding. There were illnesses. Sam developed a dangerous fever during his third winter that terrified them both, and injuries, and the normal struggles of any family. But through it all, Beatrice and Virgil faced each challenge together, their bond deepening with shared joys and sorrows. The love that had begun as a cautious courtship blossomed into a partnership of equals, built on respect, trust, and an enduring passion that surprised them both. On a warm spring evening in 1882, as they sat on their porch watching Sam, now 5, and Elizabeth, 4, chase fireflies in the yard, Beatrice leaned against Virgil's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "Happy?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked her so long ago at their first Christmas together. Beatrice looked at their children, at the home they had built, at the man beside her who had helped her find joy again when she thought it lost forever. "Completely," she said, and meant it with all her heart. Behind them, through the open door of their cabin, 2 cradles stood side by side in the children's bedroom, the original one that had once been empty, and the matching one Virgil had crafted for Elizabeth. But they weren't empty now, and never had been since Sam's birth. They were filled with blankets and small toys, with the everyday evidence of their children's lives. They had become exactly what Virgil had once described: rooms for hope, vessels of possibility. Symbols not of what was lost, but of what had been found. And in that, Beatrice had discovered a truth she carried with her always: that sometimes it is in our deepest grief that we create the space for our greatest joy.